What if I told you that a woman discovered her husband's affair through a hidden camera she installed to catch a burglar? What if I told you she waited 3 months to expose him? And what if I told you she chose the worst possible moment to reveal his betrayal? This is the story of Sarah Chen, and what she did next will shock you to your core. It was a Tuesday morning when Sarah first noticed the missing jewelry. Her grandmother's pearl earrings. Gone. Her wedding ring cleaning solution. Moved. Someone had been in their house. Someone who knew exactly where to look. But Sarah had no idea that catching this burglar would destroy her 20-year marriage forever. She bought the hidden cameras on Amazon. For tiny devices, no bigger than a thumb drive. One in the bedroom. One in the living room. One in the kitchen. And one in her husband David's home office. She told herself she was protecting their family. Protecting their home. She had no idea she was about to witness the ultimate betrayal. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. Just footage of their golden retriever, Max, stealing socks. Just footage of David making coffee in his pajamas. Just footage of their normal, boring life. Sarah almost returned the cameras. She almost chose ignorance. But something told her to wait. Something told her to watch. That instinct saved her from living a lie. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, everything changed. Sarah was at work, reviewing quarterly reports, when her phone buzzed. Motion detected in the bedroom. She opened the app, expecting to see Max on their bed again. Instead, she saw David. With a woman. In their bed. The bed where Sarah had kissed him goodnight just that morning. The woman was young, blonde, laughing, and wearing Sarah's missing pearl earrings. Sarah's hands trembled as she watched the screen. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was intimate, comfortable, familiar. David knew where Sarah kept her jewelry. He had been giving it to his mistress. For how long? How many times had they been in her bed? How many lies had David told? How many times had he kissed Sarah with the taste of another woman still on his lips? But Sarah didn't scream. She didn't confront him. She didn't break down crying in her office cubicle. Instead, she did something far more dangerous. She smiled. She saved the video. And she began to plan. Because Sarah Chen was about to teach her cheating husband a lesson he would never forget. That evening, David came home with flowers. Yellow roses. Sarah's favorites. He kissed her cheek and asked about her day. His wedding ring caught the light as he handed her the bouquet. The same ring he had removed that afternoon. The same hands that had touched another woman. Sarah smiled and put the flowers in water. She didn't mention the missing earrings. She didn't mention the cameras. She acted like the perfect wife. Because perfect wives don't suspect. Perfect wives don't know. Perfect wives definitely don't plan revenge. For 3 months, Sarah watched. The woman's name was Jessica. She was David's new assistant at the marketing firm. 28 years old. Fresh out of graduate school. Ambitious. Beautiful. And completely unaware that her married lover's wife was documenting everything. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. Every stolen lunch break. Every lie David told to cover his tracks. David told Sarah he was working late. He was at Jessica's apartment. David told Sarah he had client dinners. He was at Jessica's apartment. David told Sarah he loved her. He was texting Jessica. Sarah watched it all. Recorded it all. Saved it all. She was building a case. But not for divorce court. For something much more devastating. The family dinner was planned months in advance. David's parents were flying in from Seattle. Sarah's sister Emma was driving up from San Diego with her kids. David's brother Michael was bringing his new girlfriend. 12 people total. The biggest family gathering they'd hosted in years. David was excited. He kept talking about showing off their new kitchen renovation. About impressing his parents. About being the perfect host. Sarah nodded and smiled. Because she was going to give him exactly what he wanted. A dinner no one would ever forget. Sarah spent weeks preparing. She hired a caterer. She bought expensive wine. She decorated their dining room like a magazine spread. Everything had to be perfect. Because when you destroy someone's life, the setting matters. The audience matters. And Sarah wanted an audience. She wanted witnesses. She wanted David to understand that actions have consequences. And some consequences are public. The morning of the dinner, David was nervous. He kept adjusting his tie, checking his reflection, making sure everything was perfect. Sarah watched him practice his toast in the bathroom mirror. The same mirror where he had fixed his hair before meeting Jessica. The same mirror where he had rehearsed lies to tell his wife. Sarah almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then she remembered the pearl earrings, the violated bed, the 3 months of deception. Her sympathy evaporated. Guests started arriving at 6. David's parents, Richard and Margaret, brought stories from their cruise. Sarah's sister Emma brought homemade dessert and chaos in the form of her twin boys. Michael arrived with his girlfriend, a nervous kindergarten teacher named Lisa. Everyone hugged. Everyone laughed. Everyone commented on how happy David and Sarah looked together. How strong their marriage seemed. How they were relationship goals. Sarah smiled wider with each compliment. Because they had no idea what was coming. Dinner was served at 7. Prime rib with rosemary potatoes. Caesar salad with homemade croutons. Everything David loved. Sarah had even made his favorite dessert, chocolate lava cake. She played the perfect hostess. Refilling wine glasses. Laughing at Richard's dad jokes. Complimenting Lisa's dress. She was building the moment. Creating the contrast. Making everyone comfortable before she shattered their world. David stood to make his toast at 8:15. He tapped his wine glass with his knife. The room quieted. 12 faces turned toward him with expectation. He cleared his throat. Smiled at Sarah. Began to speak about family. About love. About commitment. About how grateful he was for everyone in that room. Sarah's finger hovered over her phone. The video was cued. The Bluetooth speaker was connected. All she had to do was press play. But she waited. She let him finish his beautiful speech about faithfulness and forever. She let him dig his grave deeper with every word. Everyone clapped. David's father wiped away a tear. Margaret reached over to squeeze Sarah's hand. Emma raised her glass for the 3rd time. Michael kissed Lisa's forehead. It was a perfect family moment. The kind you frame and put on the mantle. The kind you remember forever. Sarah was about to make sure they remembered it for all the wrong reasons. Actually, Sarah said, standing slowly, I have something to share too. Her voice was steady, calm, almost cheerful. David beamed at her. His parents leaned forward with interest. The twins stopped fighting over dinner rolls. The room fell silent. Sarah looked around the table at the faces she loved. The faces that loved David. The faces that were about to learn who David really was. 3 months ago, Sarah continued, I installed security cameras in our house. We thought we had a burglar. She paused. Let that sink in. David's smile faltered slightly. Where was this going? We never caught a burglar, Sarah said. But we caught something else. Her finger moved to her phone screen. One touch. That's all it would take. One touch to destroy everything. David's face went white. He knew. Somehow, he knew. Sarah, he said quietly, maybe we should talk about this later. But Sarah shook her head. She had waited 3 months. She had planned every detail. She had been the perfect wife while he betrayed her in their bed. Later was not an option. Later was for people who deserved privacy. David had forfeited his right to privacy the moment he brought another woman into their home. I think everyone should see this, Sarah said. And she pressed play. The sound filled the room first. David's laugh. A woman's giggle. Movement. Then the shocked gasps as the family realized what they were hearing. Sarah had chosen the audio carefully. Nothing explicit. Just enough to understand. Just enough to know. David lunged for her phone, but Sarah stepped back. The damage was done. The truth was out. His perfect image was shattered. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret covered her mouth with her napkin. Richard stared at his son like he was a stranger. Emma gathered her boys protectively. Michael's new girlfriend looked like she wanted to disappear. The twins asked why Uncle David was crying. Because David was crying. Not from remorse. From humiliation. From being exposed in front of the people whose respect he craved most. "Sarah, please," David whispered. But Sarah wasn't done. She had 3 months of evidence. 3 months of betrayal. 3 months of lies. She was just getting started. "Her name is Jessica," Sarah announced to the room. "She's his assistant. 28 years old. She particularly enjoys wearing my grandmother's pearl earrings. The ones David told me were stolen." Margaret gasped. Those earrings were a family heirloom. A symbol of lasting love. David had given them to his mistress. The insult was complete. Richard stood up abruptly. His chair scraped against the hardwood floor. "We're leaving," he announced. Margaret nodded, tears streaming down her face. They had raised David to be better than this. They had set an example of faithful marriage for 50 years. And their son had thrown it away for a woman barely older than his nephew. The disappointment in their eyes was devastating. More devastating than any legal consequence. But Sarah wasn't finished. As David's parents gathered their coats, she played another clip. This one was David's voice, clear and unmistakable. "Sarah doesn't understand me like you do," he was saying. "She's so focused on her career. So cold. I need someone warm. Someone who appreciates me." The words hit the room like physical blows. Sarah's sister Emma stood up, her face flushed with anger. "How dare you," Emma said to David. "Sarah worked 2 jobs to put you through graduate school. Sarah supported your dreams when you wanted to start your own business. Sarah has been nothing but devoted to you." Her voice rose with each word. The twins hid behind their mother, scared by the adult anger they didn't understand. Lisa excused herself to the bathroom. Michael followed his parents toward the door. The perfect family dinner was disintegrating exactly as Sarah had planned. David tried to salvage something. Anything. "It's not what it sounds like," he pleaded. "I can explain." But Sarah had more audio. More evidence. More truth. Each clip revealed another layer of his betrayal. His complaints about their marriage. His promises to Jessica. His detailed plans for their future together. A future that didn't include Sarah. A future that was never going to happen now. The final clip was the most damaging. David's voice, soft with intimacy. "I'm going to leave her after the holidays. After my parents' visit. I just need to figure out the finances. The house. Then we can be together properly." Sarah had recorded this just 2 days ago. 2 days after he had held her hand during a movie. 2 days after he had told her he loved her. 2 days after he had made love to her in the same bed where he betrayed her. The room emptied quickly after that. David's parents left without saying goodbye to him. Emma packed up her boys and drove back to San Diego that night. Michael texted later to say he was ashamed to call David his brother. Lisa, the kindergarten teacher, broke up with Michael 2 weeks later, unable to trust that cheating didn't run in the family. The ripples of David's betrayal spread far beyond their marriage. Sarah had made sure of that. By 9 o'clock, only David and Sarah remained. The dining room was a disaster. Half-eaten plates of food. Overturned wine glasses. Abandoned napkins. The chocolate lava cake sat untouched, its perfection mocking the ruins of their relationship. David sat at the head of the table, his head in his hands. Sarah stood by the window, looking out at their garden. The garden they had planted together 10 years ago. The garden that would need new ownership soon. "Why?" David finally asked. "Why didn't you just confront me? Why did you have to humiliate me like that?" Sarah turned to look at her husband of 20 years. The man who had promised to love and honor her. The man who had broken every vow they had made. The man who was still thinking about himself, even now. "Because you humiliated me first," Sarah said simply. Every time you brought her into our bed. Every time you gave her my jewelry. Every time you lied to my face while planning to abandon me. You humiliated me in private for 3 months. I just returned the favor in public." Her voice was steady, matter of fact. She had thought through every word during those long months of planning. She had no regrets. David stood up slowly. He looked around the room one more time. At the life they had built. The home they had shared. The future they had planned. All of it was over now. All of it was ruined by his choices. "I never meant for this to happen," he said. But Sarah shook her head. "You meant every bit of it," she replied. "You meant to cheat. You meant to lie. You meant to leave me for her. The only thing you didn't mean was to get caught." She walked to the front door and held it open. "Jessica's probably wondering where you are. Don't keep her waiting." David gathered his keys and wallet from the entry table. He paused at the threshold, looking back at Sarah one last time. 20 years of marriage. 2 decades of shared life. Gone in one evening. Destroyed by one dinner. "I'm sorry," he said. But Sarah had heard his apologies before. In the recordings. To Jessica. About having to go home to his wife. About having to pretend to love Sarah. His sorries were meaningless now. "I'm not," Sarah said. And she meant it. The door closed behind David with a soft click. Sarah turned off the lights and walked upstairs to their bedroom. Former bedroom. She would be moving out soon. The house would be sold as part of the divorce settlement. But tonight, for the first time in months, she would sleep peacefully. No more wondering. No more suspecting. No more living a lie. The truth was out. The consequences were unfolding. Justice was being served. Sarah removed the hidden cameras the next morning. She no longer needed them. David wouldn't be coming back. Jessica was welcome to him now, but Sarah doubted the relationship would survive. It's easy to be the exciting mistress. It's harder to be the supportive girlfriend of a man who destroyed his family. Jessica would learn that lesson soon enough. The divorce proceedings were swift. David's infidelity was well documented. His lies were on record. His financial duplicity was evident in the credit card bills for Jessica's gifts. Sarah's lawyer, Emma's recommendation, was ruthless in protecting her interests. David's lawyer advised him to settle quickly and quietly. The alternative was a trial where the recordings would become public record. David chose settlement. The last smart decision he made. Sarah kept the house. David's retirement account was split. His business assets were divided. Sarah's grandmother's pearl earrings were returned, though she could never wear them again. Too many painful memories. She donated them to a women's shelter. Let them help someone rebuild their life. Let them serve a better purpose than adorning a cheater's mistress. The family relationships never recovered. David's parents sent Sarah a heartfelt apology letter and a generous check. They included her in their Christmas card list but removed David. His own parents chose his wronged wife over their unfaithful son. The pain of that rejection would follow David forever. Michael reached out to Sarah regularly, maintaining the family bond despite his brother's actions. Emma became Sarah's fiercest defender, spreading the story as a cautionary tale about cheating husbands and vengeful wives. David and Jessica's relationship lasted exactly 4 months after the dinner. The excitement of forbidden love couldn't survive the reality of public shame and financial ruin. Jessica found a new job at a different firm. David's business suffered as word spread through their professional network. Clients don't trust men who betray their wives. Partners don't respect men who lie to their families. David learned that reputation takes decades to build and moments to destroy. 1 year later, Sarah ran into David at the grocery store. He looked older, tired, defeated. He was alone, buying frozen dinners and cheap wine. The confident, charming man she had married was gone. In his place stood a stranger with hollow eyes and slumped shoulders. He nodded politely when he saw her but didn't approach. What was there to say? What words could bridge the chasm his choices had created? Sarah, by contrast, looked radiant. She had lost 20 pounds, updated her wardrobe, started dating a kind professor from the local university, a man who appreciated her intelligence, who valued her loyalty, who understood that trust, once broken, can never be fully repaired. She was building a new life on the ashes of the old one. She was proving that revenge, properly executed, can be the beginning of healing rather than the end of hope. The story spread far beyond their small town. Emma shared it with her book club. Richard told his golf buddies. Margaret whispered it to her church friends. The tale took on a life of its own. Details were added. Embellishments appeared. But the core truth remained. Sarah Chen had exposed her cheating husband at the worst possible moment, in front of the people he most wanted to impress, and she had no regrets. Other women began reaching out to Sarah. Women who suspected their husbands. Women who had caught their husbands. Women who were planning their own revenge. Sarah became an inadvertent expert on marital justice. She listened to their stories, offered practical advice, shared legal resources. But she always ended with the same warning: revenge is a dish best served with careful planning and complete commitment. Half measures lead to half satisfaction. Sarah never remarried the professor, though they remained together for several happy years. She had learned that happiness doesn't require the validation of marriage. That fulfillment comes from within, not from a husband's promises. That trust is precious precisely because it's fragile. She had paid a high price for these lessons, but they were worth their cost. She was stronger now, wiser, more selective with her affections. David remarried eventually. A quiet woman from 2 towns over. Someone who didn't know his history. Someone who believed his version of events. Someone who thought Sarah was the problem in their marriage. Sarah wished them well, not out of forgiveness, but out of indifference. David's future was no longer her concern. His choices were no longer her burden. His happiness or misery was no longer connected to hers. The divorce had freed her from caring about his fate. The hidden cameras remained in Sarah's new apartment for security purposes, but they never captured anything more dramatic than her cat knocking over plants. The surveillance state she had created in her marriage felt necessary then, but paranoid now. Trust was possible again. Love was possible again. Betrayal was survivable. These revelations came slowly, through therapy and time and the patient kindness of people who valued honesty above comfort. 5 years after the dinner, Sarah received a letter. Not from David, but from Jessica. The younger woman had married someone else, had children, built a stable life. She wrote to apologize for her role in destroying Sarah's marriage. She wrote to acknowledge the pain she had caused. She wrote to explain that she had been young and foolish and seduced by a married man's attention. The letter was sincere, heartfelt, completely unnecessary. Sarah threw the letter away without responding. Jessica's guilt was not Sarah's problem to solve. Jessica's redemption was not Sarah's responsibility to grant. Some apologies come too late. Some wounds don't need forgiveness to heal. Some stories don't need neat endings to be complete. Sarah had moved beyond the need for closure from the people who had wronged her. She had found closure within herself. The dinner party became legendary in their social circle. A cautionary tale told at girls' nights and book clubs. A story that made wives check their husbands' phones and husbands think twice about straying. The ripple effects of that one evening continued for years. Marriages were saved by the fear it instilled. Affairs were ended before they began. Trust was rebuilt through the terror of public exposure. Sarah's revenge had accidentally become a force for marital honesty in their community. But Sarah herself rarely told the story anymore. It belonged to her past, not her present. She had moved to a new city, started a new career, built new relationships with people who knew her as she was now, not as she had been then. The victim was gone. The vengeful wife was gone. In their place stood a woman who had learned that the best revenge is living well, but sometimes public humiliation runs a close second. 10 years later, Sarah was contacted by a documentary filmmaker. Someone wanted to tell her story, to explore the psychology of marital revenge, to examine the ethics of public shame. Sarah politely declined. Some stories are too personal to share with strangers. Some victories are too hard-won to commercialize. Some revenge is too perfect to risk diluting with analysis and commentary. The hidden cameras were finally thrown away when Sarah moved to her beach house. The technology was obsolete anyway. Smartphones had made surveillance easier and more discreet. Wives could catch cheating husbands with apps now. The methods had evolved, but the need remained constant. As long as marriage existed, adultery would exist. And as long as adultery existed, wronged spouses would seek justice. Sarah had simply chosen a more creative method than most. David sent a Christmas card once. A generic holiday greeting with a printed signature. No personal message. No acknowledgement of their shared history. No apology or explanation or request for forgiveness. Sarah wondered if his new wife had insisted on it. A gesture toward civility between exes. An attempt to normalize their relationship. Sarah put the card in the recycling bin without opening it. Some gestures are too little and too late to matter. The house where the famous dinner occurred was sold to a young couple with 2 small children. They loved the updated kitchen and spacious dining room. They had no idea about its dramatic history. Sarah drove by once during a visit to her old neighborhood. The new owners had painted it yellow and planted sunflowers in the front yard. It looked happy again. Innocent. Ready for new memories that weren't tainted by betrayal and revenge. Sarah was glad. Her therapist asked once if she regretted her choice. If she would handle the situation differently with the wisdom of hindsight. Sarah considered the question carefully. The public humiliation had been devastating but effective. David's reputation never recovered. His relationship with his family was permanently damaged. His business suffered lasting consequences. The punishment fit the crime, but it was nuclear in its scope. Did she regret that? No. Sarah decided she didn't regret anything. David had made his choices with full knowledge of the consequences. He was a grown man who understood the difference between right and wrong. He had chosen selfishness over loyalty, deception over honesty, temporary pleasure over lasting commitment. Sarah had simply ensured that his choices had appropriate consequences. Public betrayal deserved public exposure. Calculated deception deserved calculated revenge. The pearl earrings found their way back to Sarah through the women's shelter. A volunteer recognized the story and thought Sarah might want them returned. But Sarah had moved beyond material possessions that carried emotional weight. She asked the shelter to auction them for charity. Let them raise money to help other women escape destructive relationships. Let them serve a purpose their original owner would have approved of. Let them create something positive from the wreckage of betrayal. Sarah's sister Emma kept the story alive through her various social circles. She told it as inspiration for wronged women, as warning for straying husbands, as proof that actions have consequences and secrets have expiration dates. Emma embellished details over the years, added dramatic flourishes, enhanced the emotional impact. The true story was powerful enough, but Emma understood that legends grow in the telling. She was keeping Sarah's legacy alive. But Sarah herself had moved beyond the need for legacy or legend. She had learned that revenge, however satisfying, was ultimately about the past. And she was focused on the future now. The new relationships she was building. The career she was advancing. The peace she was cultivating. The woman she was becoming. David and Jessica and that dramatic dinner were chapters in her story, not the entire book. The hidden camera technology that had started everything continued to evolve. Smaller devices. Better resolution. Easier installation. Sarah sometimes wondered how many other wives were watching their husbands through electronic eyes. How many other betrayals were being documented in high definition. How many other revenge plots were being carefully planned in suburban homes across the country. The tools for catching cheaters had never been better. The methods for exposing them had never been more creative. 20 years after the divorce, Sarah received news of David's death. A heart attack at 58. Sudden and unexpected. His second wife called to inform her, thinking Sarah should know. There was no emotion in the conversation. No shared grief or fond memories. Just information exchanged between strangers who had once been intimate. Sarah hung up the phone and felt nothing. No satisfaction. No sadness. No vindication. Just emptiness where strong emotions used to live. Sarah didn't attend the funeral. She had no place there among David's mourners. She had loved the man he used to be, but that man had died 20 years ago in their dining room. The man who died of a heart attack was a stranger who happened to share her ex-husband's name. She sent flowers with a generic card and tried to remember the good times from their early marriage. Before the cameras. Before the betrayal. Before the dinner that changed everything. The obituary mentioned David's surviving wife and stepchildren. His parents, if they were still alive. His brother Michael. His business associates and golf buddies. Sarah's name didn't appear anywhere. 20 years of marriage erased from his official story. She wondered if that was his choice or his widow's. It didn't matter either way. Sarah had built a new identity that didn't depend on being David Chen's ex-wife. She was Sarah Martinez now, having taken her second husband's name. She was a different person with a different life. But late that night, alone in her beach house, Sarah allowed herself to grieve. Not for the man who had died, but for the marriage that had ended so badly. For the trust that had been broken so completely. For the innocent woman she had been before she learned about hidden cameras and public revenge. That woman was gone as surely as David was gone. They had both been casualties of his choices. They had both paid prices for his betrayal. The grief passed quickly. Sarah had done her mourning 20 years ago. She had processed her anger and hurt and betrayal through therapy and time and the careful construction of a new life. David's death was simply the final punctuation mark on a story that had ended long ago. A period where she might have expected an ellipsis. A conclusion where she had grown comfortable with ambiguity. Sarah's beach house faced west, toward the sunset. She had chosen it specifically for that orientation. Every evening, she could watch the sun sink into the ocean and know that another day was ending. Another opportunity for happiness had been seized or missed. Another chance for peace had been embraced or rejected. She chose happiness. She chose peace. She chose to focus on the beauty of the present rather than the pain of the past. The documentary filmmaker contacted Sarah again after David's death. Surely now she would want to tell her story? To set the record straight. To claim her place in the narrative of their relationship. Sarah declined again, more firmly this time. David's death had not changed her fundamental belief that some stories belonged to the people who lived them. Some revenge was too personal to share with the world. Some victories were too hard-won to risk cheapening with public exposure. But the story lived on without Sarah's participation. Other people told it. Embellished it. Used it as inspiration or warning or entertainment. The basic facts remained constant. A wife caught her husband cheating through hidden cameras and exposed him at a family dinner in front of everyone who mattered to him. The consequences were swift and devastating. The marriage ended. The family fractured. The cheater's reputation was destroyed. Justice was served with surgical precision. New versions of the story appeared regularly on social media. Reddit posts and TikTok videos and Facebook shares. The details changed with each telling. Sometimes Sarah was a lawyer. Sometimes David was a doctor. Sometimes Jessica was his secretary or his trainer or his daughter's friend. But the core remained the same: betrayal discovered, revenge planned, justice delivered in the most humiliating way possible. The story had become folklore. Sarah occasionally encountered these digital versions of her life. Friends would send her links with comments like, "This reminds me of your situation," or "Can you believe this happened to someone else too?" Sarah would read them with detachment, like studying stories about strangers. The woman in these tales was braver than Sarah remembered being. More calculating. More ruthless. The legend had grown beyond the reality, which was perhaps inevitable. The beach house became Sarah's permanent residence after she retired. She had worked hard to rebuild her financial security after the divorce. Invested wisely. Lived modestly. Saved aggressively. The independence she had gained was worth more than any settlement could have provided. She owed nothing to anyone. She depended on no one for happiness or security. She had become the woman she wished she had been at 25, self-sufficient and unafraid. Visitors to the beach house often asked about the story. Sarah's reputation had preceded her to this small coastal community. People were curious about the woman who had orchestrated such perfect revenge. They expected her to be harder, colder, more bitter. Instead, they found someone who laughed easily and loved freely and held grudges lightly. The revenge had been calculated, but it hadn't calcified her heart. Sarah's advice to other wronged spouses evolved over the years. Early on, she had encouraged dramatic exposure and public humiliation. Get evidence. Plan carefully. Strike decisively. But time had taught her that revenge was a luxury, not a necessity. That healing could happen without justice. That moving forward mattered more than settling scores. She still believed David deserved what happened to him. She just no longer believed that all cheaters deserved the same treatment. The hidden cameras that had started everything were museum pieces now. Technology had moved so far beyond those clunky devices. Smartphones could do everything Sarah's elaborate surveillance system had done, and more. Apps could track locations and monitor communications and analyze behavior patterns. Modern cheaters faced digital detection methods Sarah couldn't have imagined. Modern betrayed spouses had tools for revenge she couldn't have conceived. But with better tools came greater temptation. Sarah worried sometimes about the women who contacted her for advice. They seemed angrier than she had been. More eager for dramatic confrontation. Less interested in healing and more focused on hurting. Sarah tried to counsel patience and perspective, but she understood the appeal of immediate, devastating action. She had felt that appeal herself. She had acted on it with spectacular results. The legacy of that dinner party extended beyond Sarah's personal story. It had become a cultural touchstone for discussions about infidelity and justice and gender dynamics in marriage. Feminists cited it as an example of women taking power in relationships. Men's rights activists used it to warn about false accusations and disproportionate punishment. Marriage counselors referenced it as a cautionary tale about communication breakdown. Everyone had an opinion about Sarah's choices. Sarah herself had stopped having opinions about her choices. They had been right for her situation at that time with those specific circumstances. They might be wrong for someone else in a different situation with different circumstances. Revenge was personal. Justice was subjective. Healing was individual. What worked for Sarah might destroy someone else. What destroyed David might strengthen a different marriage. Context mattered more than principle. The pearl earrings auction had raised $5,000 for the women's shelter. Not a fortune, but enough to help several families transition to independence. Sarah attended the fundraising dinner where the amount was announced. She listened to stories from women who had been helped by the shelter's services. Women who had left abusive relationships. Women who had rebuilt their lives from nothing. Women who understood that sometimes survival requires dramatic action. Sarah saw herself in these women's stories, even though her situation had been different. She had never been physically abused or financially trapped. She had never feared for her safety or her children's welfare. But she had been betrayed by someone she trusted. She had been lied to by someone she loved. She had been discarded by someone she had supported. The emotional violence was real, even if it left no visible scars. The dinner party had been Sarah's declaration of independence. Her refusal to be quietly discarded. Her demand for acknowledgement and accountability. She had chosen public exposure over private confrontation because she understood that David cared more about his reputation than her feelings. She had attacked what mattered most to him because he had attacked what mattered most to her. The symmetry was intentional and effective. But Sarah had learned that effective revenge was not the same as healing revenge. The satisfaction of David's humiliation had faded quickly. The real healing had come from rebuilding her life. From learning to trust again. From discovering her own strength. From creating new relationships based on honesty rather than convenience. The revenge had been the end of her old life, not the beginning of her new one. Young women sometimes sought Sarah out for mentorship. They had heard the story and wanted to learn from her experience. They expected lessons about surveillance techniques and confrontation strategies. Instead, Sarah taught them about self-worth and independence and the difference between justice and vengeance. She tried to help them build lives that didn't require dramatic action to defend. Prevention was better than cure. The beach house hosted many of these conversations. Sarah would serve tea on the deck overlooking the ocean and listen to stories of modern relationships. Dating apps and social media had complicated infidelity in ways Sarah's generation couldn't have imagined. Emotional affairs conducted entirely through text messages. Virtual relationships that never became physical. Betrayals that left no physical evidence but caused real emotional damage. The tools for connection had multiplied the opportunities for deception. Sarah's story resonated with these younger women because it represented agency in the face of betrayal. She had refused to be a victim. She had taken control of her narrative. She had ensured that her pain had consequences for the person who caused it. These were powerful messages for women who had been taught to suffer silently and forgive quickly. Sarah had chosen a different path, and it had led to liberation. But Sarah was careful to emphasize that her path wasn't the only path. Or necessarily the best path. It had been her path, shaped by her personality and circumstances and values. Other women might choose differently and find equal satisfaction in their choices. The goal wasn't revenge. The goal was reclaiming power and rebuilding life. How someone chose to do that was deeply personal. The hidden cameras were finally disposed of at an electronics recycling event. Sarah dropped them off without ceremony or sentiment. They had served their purpose and outlived their usefulness. The security company that had sold them was out of business. The technology was obsolete. But their impact on Sarah's life had been permanent. They had revealed truth that changed everything. They had provided evidence that enabled justice. They had been the tools of her transformation. David's grave was in a cemetery Sarah passed occasionally when visiting friends in her old neighborhood. She never stopped. Never left flowers. Never said prayers or goodbyes. The man buried there was a stranger who had once shared her life. The man she had loved was buried in memories that grew dimmer each year. Time had separated them more completely than death ever